Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again, and this time I wish to talk about thinking. And before I dive into the topic, I would like to take up two beautiful quotes which went something like this. Thinking is difficult, and that is why most people judge. This was by Carl Jung. And the next one was something like this. Children should be taught how to think and not what to think. And this is exactly what I wish to address today. And most of the times, if we look into our lives, the way we've been living our lives, or the way we've been thinking and the way we feel, is essentially talking about what we should be thinking and what we should be doing, and not how we should be doing it, how we should be thinking. So let us take up a few examples over here and let us try and place them together while deconstructing and reconstructing them at the same time. So let us take up the idea of mythology. And most people think that mythology are fictional stories. They are myths and therefore should not be trusted. There is nothing that can be learnt from myth. That is one perception of it which should be equally respected. But how about also thinking that maybe mythology and the characters that mythology talks about are metaphors to help us understand the bigger picture of life? They help us gain insight into the subjective realities of the objects that come across as realities. So it is the space in between the objects, the subjectivity, the relativity of each object to the other, that gives it more meaning. And that is what probably mythologies are trying to tell us. Those are subjective interpretations of things that are being told and retold in different ways to help us develop a better perspective, a different perspective of life towards ourselves and towards life in general. How about taking another example of Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf, two very beautiful, famous, powerful people, two people that I hugely admire. And one of them represents consistency all throughout her career and even post her career. There is a certain consistency about Steffi Graf that all of us appreciate, that has never wavered. And yet, Andre Agassi, on the other hand, has been consistently inconsistent and yet been consistent in those inconsistencies. And that sounds a little paradoxical, doesn't it? Well, even if you look at the word inconsistent, it invariably means inconsistency. And so, yes, he is one person who has constructed and deconstructed and reconstructed himself. He is one person who has constantly tried to align himself with his innermost self. He is one person who's constantly shown growth in some ways or the other. And if it meant functioning like the wave, which goes up and which goes down and which goes up and goes down again, he's done that. So he has been consistent on that realm as well. Now let us take up another example from the Indian mythology, that of Ravana, a character who had kidnapped Sita, and because of whom it is assumed that a war had broken out. But then how about also thinking that Ravana was one character who did capture Sita in some ways, as the mythology goes, but he was also a character who was supremely knowledgeable, who had a lot of information, and probably that information could not be converted, that knowledge could not be converted into wisdom. There was no other knowledgeable man like him, and that is why they say he had 10 heads, but it also meant that he had a bigger ego. And is that ego bad all the time? Maybe no. And maybe yes, it's all our perception. And then how about also thinking that probably it was because of Ravana that Indians at certain point in time could venture beyond river Narmada, could go up till Sri Lanka. Because had he not kidnapped Sita, probably there would not have been the knowledge of Sri Lanka existing in this world, at least at that point in time. So maybe it is also about understanding that knowledge, that information is good enough. But unless it is converted to wisdom, it really is not transformative enough. It really holds no meaning than just a collection of words. Let us take up another example. Scientists now today say, science today tells us that our left hemisphere of the brain processes language. So when we talk about language, are we only talking about the words that we utter while talking? Because that is the speech. Or are we also talking about how that speech is framed, how it is conveyed, the pause that is taken in between and the pause that is not taken, the body language, the facial expressions, the tightness of the body or the openness of the body. And probably, when we talk and think of language only in terms of the speech or the words that are used to convey a certain thing, we essentially lose out on the bigger picture. Now I'll cite another example. As I was growing up and when I was growing up, and even till date, I love reading history. And I love reading history like a novel, like a storybook. But unfortunately, most people don't. Because when we are taught history as a subject, most of us reduce history to just dates and to the events that happened. And we are just supposed to memorize it and write it down. Very rarely are we taught to think about history as life events that were happening at a certain point in time, and that there were certain characters that were playing out a certain role in the history that we know of today, or that we do not know of today. Because then again, I clearly remember I had some of the most fantastic history teachers, and then I had this professor when I was in college, one of the most fantastic history teachers that anybody can ask for. Or I would rather say, one of the best mentors anybody can ask for. And when we first entered his class, after the first 2-3 lectures, after introducing and reintroducing himself and ourselves to him, and going through a few chapters in the history, he one day said, that in this class, there is no right or wrong. In this class, we are talking about a story that happened, and there were different characters that were playing an important role in that story. And history is a part of their story that they were trying to tell, that they were trying to live, that they were living at a certain point in time, given a certain cultural context, given a certain social construct, and given a certain financial construct at a certain period in time. And then he even went on to say that always remember that history is one subject that allows you to see it as a story being heard from different perspectives by the characters that were playing a part in that story. And it's never the same, it's varied. And that is what makes it so interesting, and that is what makes life so interesting. That it's a narrative that is told from different perspectives, and it cannot ever be lateral and linear. But yes, he also mentioned that when you are writing the answer paper, remember that there are people who are working in a certain standardized format. So try and answer the question when you are attempting the examination in that standardized format, because at the end of it, you've got to get your degree in hand. You've got to get your marks. But do not ever forget that we are here to learn and develop a bigger and better perspective about the things that we are talking about. Which also meant that he gave us the liberty to have a perception about an idea that was being told by some people, that was being formulated by some people, being standardized by some people, and yet he gave us the liberty to say that now have a completely different idea about the same idea, that a perception of it has been given and handed over to you. And I think that's a beautiful thing to do. It enables us develop a better, a holistic perspective about things. And they say that universe keeps getting us back, that life keeps us getting back to same things over and over and over again, so that we can start developing bigger and better perspectives of it, so that we can start changing and transforming ourselves by developing different perspectives. And if that is not a process of evolution, then what is? I think we should question those things. And I think that on a regular basis, we should try and develop different perspectives about the same idea that has been brought before us. Because unless we do that, this will fossilize. And if this fossilizes, this will automatically fossilize, which means that life is being fossilized, or which also means that we are not freeing ourselves, that we are not coming out of our own mindsets. And it is equally important to break open the mindset so that a newer perspective can filter in, so that a newer perspective can grow, evolve, so that we evolve. Let us try and do that, and I will see you once again next week. Till then, stay tuned in.